And this is really remarkable if you think about it. This is Israelite literature, but this is highly self-aware literature. We're like way far removed from like nationalist propaganda or something like this. This is the literature of a people group that truly believes that they have been chosen by the God of the universe to be the vehicle of heavenly blessing to all the nations of the earth. That's a fairly tall claim to assert about one's own people group. But yet within these same texts that tell that story and make that claim is this deep degree of self-critical awareness that God's own covenant people are more often than not the primary obstacle to God's purposes in the world. And that surprisingly, it's those who you assume are outside of covenant relationship with Yahweh who are actually the most spiritually attuned to what God is actually up to in the world.
Many know this channel went on a pilgrimage of sorts across the country to Portland, where we met Tim Mackie and even toured the Bible Project studios. It was such an epic Bible nerd moment. The main reason I was there was for a Hebrew Bible conference and to interview one of the great biblical educators of our day, Ray Lubeck. Ray Lubeck is a special human being. Ray is an author and educator that has produced a large number of incredible biblical scholars and minds like Tim Mackie, Andrew Teeter, Carissa Quinn, Dr. Carmen Imes. This Hebrew Bible conference was mind-blowing and paradigm-shattering for me. It was a foundational moment for my life and this ministry. We recently have gone back through the teachings and are actually in production of a series releasing my personal experience and some edits of my favorite teachings from this incredible Hebrew Bible conference. Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells, where we exist to help you rediscover the supernatural focus of your Bible. We believe this supernatural focus has been suppressed, and we're here to bring that back into the light. We've got an amazing series going over this Hebrew Bible conference. We're going to have talks from Tim Mackie, Carmen Imes, Ray Lubeck himself. Buckle up and get ready for one of the most amazing talks that you will ever hear.
My presentation, this is about Jonah, because how could it not be? The first class that I had the opportunity to take with Ray was Bible Study Methods, how to read biblical literature. And as you know, it was building the skill set for how to read biblical narrative, biblical poetry. And one of the most introductory skills, was surely within the first half a dozen classes, was the most basic skill that to me has become the most valuable skill that just keeps on giving. And that's at the core of, and I've developed my language for how to talk about it, but at its core, it's look at the thing. Professor Agassiz and the fish, anybody? Do you remember the parable? Look at it, go to sleep, look at it again, and then again, and then again. And notice things that repeat. So my presentation is titled Chosen One or Traitor, Jonah, Achan, that's how you say his name in Hebrew, and not Achan, Achan, and narrative analogy in the Hebrew Bible. My friends, you don't even have to have taken ever a class on how to study the Bible to realize when you're reading the story of Jonah, you're reading something akin to what we might call a takedown piece in our culture today. So the story of Jonah is a highly satirical and critical portrait of a stubborn Israelite prophet whose name means dove. Jonah means dove. And one of the most consistent tools that the narrator uses to deepen the portrait of the stubborn prophet is character contrast, specifically with two groups of non-Israelites, the sailors in chapter 1, the Ninevites in chapter 3. And what I want to do is focus in on a set of character contrasts in the storm scene with the sailors in chapter 1. This scene is full of ironies, and the more you stare at it, the more it just keeps on making you laugh. For example, sailors who, aren't the most savory crowd in most cultures that you go into, but the sailors are able to discern in the storm that comes upon them on the ship that there are divine powers at work behind the storm. So much so that they're screaming and yelling out to their gods, while Jonah, God's chosen one, decides this is the perfect time to go take a nap, right? Right, and you laugh because it's funny and you're supposed to. Jonah only ends up calling on his God, like the sailors, because the captain hunts him down and compels him to pray to his God. And this creates the deep irony that you have a pagan sailor telling an Israelite whose people only exist because their God rescued them at sea from the waters, right? The Sea of Reeds. And he has to be reminded of this to pray for a sea rescue. Are you guys with me? Okay. So the sailors' terror and fear at the divine power behind the storm is emphasized no less than 3 times. They feared, the men were greatly afraid, and then they feared a great fear. They feared a great fear 3 times. And this is in contrast to what Jonah claims to have, which is, he says, I'm a Hebrew and I fear Yahweh, the God who made, right, the sea and the dry land. And of course, you're just like, no, you don't. Nobody who fears Yahweh would try to run away from Yahweh by getting on a boat, no less. And again, that's the whole point, is that we laugh. So there are many, many examples, and you can read all the commentaries, and they all observe. It's just right there on the surface, low-hanging fruit, that Jonah is being contrasted with the sailors, and that contrast is actually deepening. If you're willing to stare at the thing and meditate on those contrasts, the portrait of Jonah becomes multicolor 3D, much more deep than if you were just to read it, on one time and think that you get what the story is all about. So what I want to concentrate on is this technique. It's a technique that I learned from Ray, and then it's a technique the biblical authors are constantly drawing upon, and it's just the gift that keeps on giving. And I keep rediscovering how important this tool is, and I just want to focus on it. It's fairly simple. You might be really underwhelmed by what I'm about to share after the quality of this morning's presentations, but nonetheless, this is my humble offering. Under promise, over deliver, that kind of thing. All right. So the strategy that the narrator works is very simple. The word fear is used 4 times in the storm scene. 3 times of the sailors. They were afraid, they feared a great fear, they feared a great fear. This sets you up so that the repetition of the word fear, when you hear the word come out of Jonah's mouth, notice it's the narrator who says the sailors are truly afraid. But the narrator doesn't say that Jonah's afraid, it's actually Jonah that claims for himself. And you're already suspect of his integrity as a character because of what he's done so far. So, do you guys get the technique? It's the repetition that makes you think, oh, those guys fear God. This guy says he fears God, but I'm pretty sure that he doesn't. Did you guys get it? Okay, there you go. That's it. You got it. That's how it works. So just rinse and repeat. Just do this, and you will begin to experience the kind of sophistication of character portraits that the Hebrew Bible really offers if you're willing to stare at the thing over and over and over again. What I would like to do is offer my observations of a set of character contrasts that, to my knowledge, hasn't been noticed by anything that I've read, and of course I've become obsessed with Jonah. I'm not sure my stack of Jonah commentaries rivals yours yet, but it might, I'm not sure. But so thank you for this obsession with the book. So these kinds of character contrasts in the last half century of scholarly literature on literary analysis of biblical narratives, one of the names that these types of contrasts or comparisons have been called is narrative analogy. And the basic tool is fairly simple. A narrator will use key words and images in one particular story to contrast one place with another place, one thing with another thing, to compare one person with another person. And as you notice, the repeated words are the invitation to hold the 2 things and to compare and to meditate on them. This one's fairly easy to know that you're supposed to compare them because it's in the same exact scene, like it's in the same exact paragraph. But the biblical authors were not limited to using this technique to just compare and contrast things within the same exact scene, the same poem, or even the same story. Biblical authors are also doing the same thing when they set two stories next to each other. Biblical authors are also using the same technique when they link together character, places, or stories that are on separate scrolls in the biblical collection. And what's interesting is that the terminology for these sets of comparisons, when they're on different chapters or different scrolls, we use the words intertextuality, interbiblical allusion, or hyperlink. Whichever term you want to choose, we're just describing the same exact thing. Repeated words and images that call one story or poem to mind, and you're meant to upload both of them. Click on the hyperlink, so to speak. Upload both in your minds, and then meditate biblical style, which is not to empty your mind, but to focus your mind on meditating on the two stories as if they're side by side. How you guys doing? You're probably not learning anything right now, but it's just good to be reminded of the fundamentals, because stare at the thing again, one more time. So the reservoir of potential analogies for character comparison and contrast span the entire biblical collection. And biblical authors are constantly doing this pervasively. Let me illustrate a more complex example of narrative analogy. And again, this is, many people have noticed this before me. The second line of Jonah, when God says to Jonah, "Go to Nineveh, that great city, call out against it, because their evil has risen up before me." This is a more complex example of narrative analogy. The precise wording of God's words to Jonah in verse 2 actually comes from two places in the Torah, but those two places in the Torah are themselves hyperlinked through narrative analogies through a whole network of texts. Beginning with the story of Cain and Abel, we hear about the blood of Abel crying out to the ground, and God hears the cry. The flood story begins with God saying, "The end of all flesh has come before me," Ba'al Lefanai. In the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, it's very great, its sin is heavy. I will go down and see if its outcry, Achan, has come to me, if that's what they have done totally. The Israelites suffering in Egypt, and they cried out, and their outcry rose up to God from their slavery. How you guys doing? So this is a network of narrative analogies. Each one down the chain is activating some previous narrative analogy from earlier in the Torah. And so what the reader, the process the reader's being asked to undergo is to compare Pharaoh, starting at the bottom, compare Pharaoh and what he's doing, the evil that he's perpetrating and the outcry that he's causing, to the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah, so that Egypt is like a new Sodom and Gomorrah. But Sodom and Gomorrah is like a new generation of the flood. And the generation of the flood is the culmination of the violence begun with Cain and Abel. You guys tracking with me? That's how it works. And so notice that the narrator of Jonah begins the book of Jonah by just citing two links of the chain. But in reality, what you're being asked to do is recall something you're supposed to already know, which is all of the links in the chain. And so you won't be surprised that later in Jonah, you will have other narrative analogies that compare Nineveh to Sodom and Gomorrah, even though the Sodom and Gomorrah text wasn't the one hyperlinked, verbatim in the opening line. You guys tracking with me? So this is what you call the work of ninja masters. And you're just supposed to know because the ideal readers and the actual communities that produce these biblical texts guided by God's Spirit were ninja nerds, literary ninja nerds. And it's not just because they thought literary art is cool. It's exactly what Andy was sharing this morning. It's because God's Spirit guided these authors out of a context in which it's a way of seeing reality, and a way of seeing the world, and the texts are an instantiation of a way of understanding the divine purpose at work in the world. To notice patterns in these texts is training us to notice patterns in our own lives as well, as we attempt to discern the divine purpose in our day too. So what I'd like to do with the brief time that I have left is show you one other narrative analogy that I haven't heard anyone else talk about, but I am certain it's what's going on, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that I am. In Jonah chapter 1, verse 7, the sailors say to each other, "Come, let us cause lots to fall down, apira gororot, so we can know on whose account this evil referring to the storm, on whose account this evil is to us." And so they cause lots to fall down, and the lot fell upon dove, Jonah. So this type of story where there's some disaster either present or looming, and there is some lot casting ritual in order to discover the culprit. Yes, this was a practice that was common in the ancient Near East, also in ancient Israel. But that doesn't explain why this particular way of finding a culprit for a disaster that's either present or is about to happen, why it happens not everywhere in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, it happens precisely 5 times. And as you meditate on each of these 5 times, these are not the only 5 times that casting lots happens. There's Esther and Purim, there's the division of the promised land in Joshua. But where there's a disaster looming or about to happen, or present, and the culprit is somehow surfaced through lot casting, well, it actually just happens these 5 times. And very similar to the stories of the outcry, these 5 stories are riddled with hyperlinking vocabulary. They're inviting the reader to make a whole series of narrative analogies. Shall we? Let us. Actually, we can't do all of them. Actually, I just said, shall we? No, it's not what we're going to do. What we're going to do, we're just going to focus on one, the discovery of Achan. In the paper, I also include the selection of the goat of sin on the Day of Atonement, but I am certain that there's not going to be time for that another day. I want to meditate just for a few minutes on the story of Achan's treachery in Joshua chapter 6, 7, and 8, and then show how that's relevant for an aspect of Jonah's character that's uniquely connected to this narrative analogy. The story of Joshua chapter 6 through 8, it's a triad of literary units. It's the victory at Jericho. Then they go to the city of Ai. The Israelites go to Ai, and there's a defeat. Then they resolve the problem, and then there's a victory again. Victory, defeat, victory. Yeah? Anybody? So it's a nice little triad, little symmetrical thing of awesomeness. In the story of the victory, right, at Jericho, there's a speech that Joshua gives before the Israelites are to march around the city for the 7th time on the 7th day. And what he says is the city and everything that's in it is to be devoted to Yahweh. Only Rachav, the prostitute, and all who are with her in the house will live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. That was back in Joshua chapter 2. Joshua says, as for y'all, keep away from the things devoted to destruction, so that you don't take them and bring about your own destruction, making the camp of Israel an object for destruction, bringing trouble, achar, upon it. But all the silver and gold and items of bronze and iron, holy to Yahweh, they must go into the treasury. So notice here you have an enemy city. You have the Israelites, and they can see the enemy. It's outside. The enemy is out there. But then what's interesting about the enemy out there is within the enemy out there is one who is actually a friendly, an insider. That's namely Rachav and the prostitute. And she is to be saved from the enemy without and brought within. You guys tracking with me? So the outsider actually becomes the insider because of her faithfulness to Yahweh, which was to rescue the spies when they entered into the city. But Joshua warns, because we, being the covenant insiders, risk making ourselves the enemy outsiders if we take from the devoted things and bring achar, trouble, upon the people of Israel. Perish the thought that anybody would do that. And of course, that's precisely what happens. The Israelites, chapter 7, verse 1, broke faith concerning the devoted things, and Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerach, of the tribe of Judah, troublemakers, he took from the devoted things, and Yahweh's anger was kindled against the Israelites. So, notice we have an enemy outsider, Rachav, and all who are with her, who are actually becoming the covenant insiders. And now we have a covenant insider who is making themselves a covenant outsider. You guys tracking? Yep. So the enemy without becomes the enemy within. So what's interesting about what happens next in the story is that when Joshua confronts Achan, here's what God says to Joshua. Yahweh says, "Stand up, why have you fallen on your face? Israel sinned and transgressed by covenant that I commanded. They have taken the devoted things. They have stolen, acted treacherously, and put them among their kelim." Just tuck that away. They've put the devoted things that are the sign of destruction among the kelim. "In the morning," this is what God says to Joshua, "come forward tribe by tribe. And the tribe that Yahweh captures will be brought forward by clans." We're describing here a casting of lots ceremony. But what's interesting is the vocabulary chosen to talk about this selection by lot is not the phrase used in Jonah, "let us make lots fall down." It's to capture by means of the lot, lachad. It's said 3 times over. The capture of the clans, the capture of a family, then the capture of the one. And that one that is captured is to be burned with fire, he and all that belongs to him. So what's really remarkable in the story that follows is when Achan gets surfaced, all of a sudden you notice something. Here in the left column, it's the narration of the defeat of Jericho. And what you're told is that the people charged into Jericho, ahead into the city, and what did they do to it? They captured it, lachad. Joshua said to the 2 men who spied on the land, "Hey, go to that prostitute's house and bring her out, the woman and all who belong to her, just as you swore." The young men who were spies went out. They brought out Rahav and what's all that belongs to her, her father, her mother, her brothers, all with her. Then they burned the city with fire and all that was in it. They put only the items of silver and gold and copper and iron into the treasury. You guys tracking? That's how you deal with the enemy without. Well, except for that one who's actually not the enemy without. She's the insider on the out who becomes the insider within. You guys tracking? Yeah? Okay. Here in Joshua chapter 7, an insider has made themselves not just an outsider, but an enemy of Yahweh. And what are they to do with that one? They do to Achan exactly what they did to Jericho in exactly the same language. God says, "There are devoted things in your midst, O Israel. You'll be unable to stand before your enemies until you get rid. You got to get rid of the devoted things. In the morning that you come forward, capture by lot, the one captured is to be burned with fire." Yeah? That's exactly what happened to the city. Who will be burned with fire? He and all that belong with him. Did you guys get it? Yeah. So in other words, in Joshua 6, the enemy city is captured and burned with fire, but one enemy outsider is to be spared, namely Rachav and all who are with her. In Joshua 7, an Israelite who's made themselves the enemy within by betraying Yahweh is selected and captured and burned with fire, and all who are with him. Achan has become the enemy city, an enemy citadel within Israel itself. So what this story is doing is, it's very easy, and this is an experience many people have. The first time that they read through the story of Joshua is they assume God is pro-Israel and anti-Canaanite. Well, except for the Canaanites who become part of the covenant people, and except for the Israelites who make themselves into God's enemy. And then you're like, well, I guess everything's off now. Really what matters is how one responds to the word and instruction of Yahweh, and how each person responds to the word and instruction of Yahweh determines one's covenant relationship to Yahweh. Joshua 6 and 7. How you guys doing? Okay. We are now in a position to back up and come back to the story of Jonah. And you will begin to notice some things that perhaps you wouldn't have noticed before. Joshua chapter 7, the story of Achan, begins with telling us that Yahweh's anger burned against Israel, vayichar af. And they're defeated by the soldiers of Ai. This is on the left column. And this causes the Israelites' hearts to melt and become like the water. So anger reduces things to water. Interestingly, the storm scene in Jonah begins by telling us that Yahweh sends a great wind against the sea waters so that the waters become angry, za'af. They rage with anger, angry waters, threatening everyone on the ship. Here on the left-hand column, in the green, Achan takes the plunder, and what does he do with it? Do you remember? He says he hid it. And where did he hid it? He hid it among his kelim, among his cargo, his belongings or the baggage in his tent. What is it that Jonah did the moment he gets onto the ship? He goes and he hides himself below deck. And where do you what do you keep below deck on a merchant vessel? The kelim, the cargo. So much so that this is exactly what they're throwing off of the ship. Yep. So eventually Jonah gets treated like the banned cargo. You guys get it? Yeah, you got to get rid of those banned kelim, including the enemy within. There's a lot casting ceremony to both, and the lot falls on the troubler, the one who has brought trouble, Achan, son of Carmi. So also on the ship, there is a lot casting ceremony, and the lot falls on Jonah, the son of Amittai. Achan, son of Carmi, is Achan, son of my vineyard. Jonah, son of Amittai, is Jonah, son of my faithfulness. Not. Chapter 7, Joshua's this is the gimme. This is great, you guys. Joshua's confrontation with Achan. Joshua says, "Tell me, please, hagednali, what have you done? Ma asita." And Achan says, "Well, according to this I have done, kazot asiti." The sailor, the captain, comes to Jonah and asks, "Tell us, please, hagidna lanu, what is this that you have done? Mazot asita." Because he knew he was fleeing from Yahweh, because he told them. Higid lahem. Do you get it? Come on, that's good. Now, let the reader understand this. Both of these are themselves being set on narrative analogy to the Garden of Eden story. This is precisely the language God uses when he confronts Adam and Eve when they've taken from the tree, but that would be a whole other presentation. The story ends with a measure for measure consequence. Achan took from the plunder, and so he is treated like plunder that is taken from the enemy city. Jonah brought the dangerous waters on the ship, and so he is cast into those dangerous waters himself. You guys tracking? Okay. So once again, the skill set is exactly the same. When you look at one paragraph and you see they feared. This guy says he fears. Nuh-uh. Okay? But that nuh-uh is not explicit in the text. It's a space that is created, to use Andy's imagery, it's a space that's created by two things brought into relationship. And then all of a sudden, you're left to sit with this portrait of a character whose words and actions do not match the words and actions of these others. And all of a sudden, what was a 2D story that is most often made into children's literature becomes a full multicolor 3D portrait. You guys tracking with me? The same exact technique is happening, except this time, the narrative analogies that are at work are on totally different scrolls within the Tanakh. You have Jonah in the prophets, and then you have Joshua in the former prophets themselves being all mapped back onto Adam and Eve in the Torah. And what are all of these analogies about? These analogies in the Garden of Eden story, but specifically in Joshua and in Jonah, are about, it's a profound meditation. And this is really remarkable if you think about it. This is Israelite literature. But this is highly self-aware literature. We're like way far removed from like nationalist propaganda or something like this. This is the literature of a people group that truly believes that they have been chosen by the God of the universe to be the vehicle of heavenly blessing to all the nations of the earth. That's a fairly tall claim to assert about one's own people group. But yet within these same texts that tell that story and make that claim, is this deep degree of self-critical awareness that God's own covenant people are more often than not the primary obstacle to God's purposes in the world. And that surprisingly, it's those who you assume are outside of covenant relationship with Yahweh who are actually the most spiritually attuned to what God is actually up to in the world. And it seems to me that this is a really important insight that the biblical authors want us to think about a lot, because you can find this theme riddled through all of the books of the Hebrew Bible. This set of narrative analogies is just one instantiation of those themes. Were we to meditate on all of the lot-casting texts, this is the basic idea of what's happening in all of them. What else is the Day of Atonement about? Is that the Eden presence has taken up space in the midst of God's own people, and yet they are the ones who are constantly vandalizing God's space in their midst, the enemy within. And Saul and Jonathan and so on, but time does not permit. Now this is a fairly sophisticated set of operations you have to know these texts really well. That's why this is literature for a lifetime. But for those of you who are no matter where you're at in your journey of learning how to read and meditate on biblical texts, I want to encourage you that a 20-year-old who had been following Jesus a year finds themselves sitting in Ray's class for the first time. I don't know anything about this stuff. And yet, within a semester, I had tools that I could put to work to begin to have my own profound discoveries of what's happening in these texts, so that I am having, as a 20-year-old man, young man who's surrounded by a whole college of people who are all studying Scripture together, who are all learning to follow Jesus together, who were all, at that time, going to chapel multiple times a week and worshiping Jesus together. And in that environment, it was precisely these tools that became a vehicle for Scripture to speak the voice of God into my life. And that is really what this is all about, because God have mercy on us if we ourselves become the enemy within. And he does have mercy on us, doesn't he? And by that mercy, we believe that God's blessing will go out to the nations despite our successes or our failures. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a brilliant mind and talk. This talk was incredible and truly displays the beauty and genius of the literary structures of the Hebrew Bible. It shows the importance of scholarship and being connected with the right scholars. And that's what we're going to do here at this channel, is try to keep you connected with the right scholars so that we can all learn and grow together about the good news that we have to share about what Jesus has done for our world. Now, as we close with some awesome question and response from some of the crowd at this amazing Hebrew Bible conference, I'm also going to include a small snippet from Ray Lubeck, the former professor that this whole entire Hebrew Bible conference was held in honor of. You're going to love it, and I want you to stay tuned. We're going to have a lot coming out regarding this Hebrew Bible conference. It was amazing. I want to share it with you guys. I think you're going to learn a lot from it, and let's close with these awesome...
The first question, is there any New Testament hyperlink from Achan and Jonah that we can identify, perhaps the insider turned outsider?
Where to go first? I think one significant ones from the Gospel of Matthew, recall that in the opening genealogy in Matthew highlights a handful of women in that genealogy. One of them is Rachav from this story, a Canaanite woman. And what's interesting about that is later on in Matthew chapter 15, he's going to narrate a whole encounter that Jesus has with a woman that he calls the Canaanite woman. In Mark, she's called the Syrophoenician woman, but Matthew uniquely calls her the Canaanite woman. And it's precisely that encounter that he has with a non-Israelite. And he is, depending on how you read that story, either compelled or he compels her to press in more. But he ends up giving the blessing of the family of Abraham that brings healing power to a Canaanite woman, precisely because of that interaction. And that connects to a whole theme that's littered throughout Matthew that actually began with the Roman centurion, when he says, I haven't found anyone within Israel with faith like this Roman centurion, and then later the Canaanite woman. So it's a good example of how the apostles, however you explain how the techniques and skills for how to read and meditate on this literature, how it got passed down from the First Temple period through the exile into Second Temple Judaism. The apostles were so in tune with how to read and understand what was happening in these texts, and that's a really good example. And that as you read through biblical texts, I mean, Carmen's presentation is such a great example. How many of you read the Bible and are regularly confused? Right? And so I think because our theological shaping rightly wants to point us towards accuracy and right thinking about God, it can make reading biblical literature really frustrating because it's constantly forcing us to ask questions and have no clue what's going on. And so we experience it as a glitch in the Bible, like the Bible's not working right, when it's precisely the opposite. It's a feature. It's an intentional feature of these stories to make us confused and to make you puzzled and to make you hold multiple possibilities of interpretation open and then keep reading. And it's precisely as you reread and reread through the collection that clarification of earlier puzzles, you find your answers later on. And sometimes it's not after a decade, because you yourself are becoming a ninja master of the collection. And like that's how this literature works. Reading multiple translations, learning how to use a concordance, and especially digital concordances where you can at least find a tool where you can see what are Greek or Hebrew words, even transliterated underneath the English words. And even if reading a more literal translation, like the New American Standard, for example, where it more consistently uses the same English word for the same Greek or Hebrew words, it usually makes for bad English, like really terrible English, but a great study Bible. So, don't use it to read it to anybody out loud, but use it to study with, because it's a really great way to encounter the text. And that's how I started. And then it was after years of just doing that in English where I just wanted more, lit the fire, that I was motivated enough to learn the original languages myself.
Can you tell us the overarching story of the Bible?
In all of my Bible classes, I start off saying that there's a meta-narrative, that though there's discourse and there's poetry and other types of writing within the Bible, it's still all held together by one big story. And from my lit classes, even in secular schools, I learned that the basic things that you look for when you read a story are characterization, setting, and plot. Those are the basics. The sine qua non. Without those three, you don't have a story. Okay? If the Bible is a story, or since the Bible is a story, then who are the characters? Well, the main characters are pretty easy to figure out. It's going to be humanity, God, and to a far lesser degree, Satan, but also the world. And I include that as character because the heavens and the earth are called upon as witnesses to the covenant. I can elaborate on that more, but I won't. So we have the characters, we have the setting. Once again, heavens and the earth, which is where we are. What's the plot? And can the plot of the Bible be stated simply? And so I give them the age-old logical dilemma. What happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? And that is the conflict of the Bible. The irresistible force is God's desire to bless us. The immovable object is that we don't want to be blessed on God's terms. We want to seek our welfare on our own terms. Now, when you state it as bluntly as that, do you want to be blessed or not? It sure makes every sin that we ever commit seem awfully stupid. No, I don't want to be blessed. I'd rather try it my own way. Okay, and how's that working out? Well, ever since the fall, not very well. Not very well at all. Now, if that's the big idea, you can kind of zero down to a much smaller level and chapter by chapter I think that we see an emphasis on either the irresistible force, God's blessing, or on the rebellion, the unstoppable or the immovable object. So Genesis chapter 1, that would be blessing. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Genesis 2, also about blessing. Genesis chapter 3, human rebellion. We don't want to do it your way. Genesis chapter 4, Cain and Abel, human rebellion. Genesis chapter 5, and at this point, we tend to kind of tune out because Genesis 5 is just a genealogy. But what is a genealogy? It's the being fruitful and multiplying. It's the blessing actually working its way out in life. Genesis 6 through 9, oy vey. It's all about human hard-heartedness and rebellion. Okay, but at the end of 9, you have Noahic covenant. It's about blessing. Genesis chapter 10, 11, 12. You just go back and forth between blessing and obstinance on people's part. And so I think there's a stronger emphasis on one over the other in most of the narrative of the entire Bible. And so when I'm reading any chapter of the Bible, I'm thinking in terms of that matrix, again, with a different question now than you're typically going to find like in a commentary. But is this mostly about blessing or is this mostly about rebellion?
And that kind of helps you shape as you read the text.
Yeah, although I wouldn't say it's shaping as much as it helps me to follow it.
Yeah.
What is it doing?
Yeah. So in that frame, the end of the story.
Which is the greatest part, because this sounds so, to me, so incredibly postmodern. It is quite literally, a choose your own ending story. The whole Bible is. Because when you get to the end, which wins out? The irresistible force or the immovable object? And when I ask students that in class, of course, they all say the irresistible force because God has to win. He's more powerful. But God, in his wisdom, has created it a different way. And here I'll draw on C.S. Lewis, who said in the end, there's two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done. And those to whom God says, thy will be done. So in the end, we get to choose how our story is going to end. And it's either going to be beyond anything that our minds can imagine or that our eyes have seen. It's a happily ever after to an infinite power. Or, as C.S. Lewis puts it, we can't conceive of it in the worst of our nightmares. It will be so tragic because ultimately it's about, for those who choose not to be blessed on God's terms, it's about alienation.
Weeping and gnashing of teeth outside. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's all about distance from. That is the
separation.
Yeah.
Separation from the source of every good and perfect gift, according to James.
Wow. How incredible is this? I hope you guys are enjoying this and I hope you're learning a lot. I want to ask you for a second to subscribe. If you're enjoying the content, share it, press that like button, slap it. Help this channel grow. Help the message of the good news of what Jesus has done for this world get out. You're a part of this community with me. I always say we, and really it's just me behind the camera. But I've got you guys as support, encouragement, and you're here for the ride, and I'm so grateful for you. So thank you for subscribing, thank you for liking, thank you for sharing the content, and thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Let's get back to ringing them bells.